Good afternoon, Charles.
Hey Russ, how you doing?
Good. How are you?
Good.
I know we've been on a bunch of Zooms today, but we haven't actually chatted yet, right?
No, this is true. I think we've just been moving through the slides.
Hey, let's dig right in interest of time. So, big news. Google brings MLS listings to search. So we all know who Google is, and we certainly all know about MLS listings. Um, this is a big story, I think, Charles.
Yeah, absolutely. When the largest distributor of information in the world decides to get into the portal war, I
Yeah.
think we have some news.
Absolutely. So it's interesting that Google. So I mean, we've on this Mile High Market Brief the last few weeks. We've talked a bunch about Zillow and Compass and MLS and MRED and Real Tracks and what's going on and kind of this war that's started. And it's interesting that Google, as they decided to dip their toe, and their toe is a big one, as you mentioned, when Google decided to jump on the display listings game, they're choosing MLS data as their source for listings rather than private listing networks. Why do you think they're doing that?
I guess it gets kind of interesting, right? Because when we've been talking about this national MLS, right? Like that's been the conversation. Do we go to KW.com? Do we go to XYZ.com? Do we go to Zillow? Do we go to Realtor? Like there's so many different places, and yet why wouldn't we just go to Google? And so when we're in this Google driven world for information, I think this makes a whole lot of sense for them to raise their hand and say, yes, we're going to enter into this because everyone's going probably from Chrome or insert whatever platform here to actually start their search. So might as well show listings on it as well.
Yeah. It's funny. We think, well, I need to buy a home, Zillow. Like
Yeah.
that's what everyone thinks. But really what happens is somebody gets on Google and says, I'm thinking about buying a home. What do I do first? So why not, from Google's perspective, why not jump in and figure out where this can lead for them? The rollout on this is limited. I think, four MLSs participating and a promise that it'll be expanded to everywhere pretty soon.
Yeah. And it's just currently living on this thing right now, right? This is not on a desktop app. This is truly playing from your cell phone. And so it gets really interesting in this SEO, AEO, GEO driven world to where we would, yes, you're right. Like we would go on to Google, and then from Google, we would go into the search bar and type in Zillow and then type
Yeah.
in 123 Main Street. And yet, with all the information that's going through Google right now and how they're choosing to play from an AI perspective, it makes a whole lot of sense for you just to type in straight 123 Main Street and that Google search bar just open up and just show you the entire listing without you having to click off of their website and go somewhere else.
Yeah. How much is this going to cost right now?
Yeah, yeah. As far as what? As far as where we're going from the agent perspective or from the consumer?
Agent perspective.
Yeah, I mean, so the agent perspective, I mean, this is where it's going to get very interesting, right? Because this is going to be one of those plays to where it is going to take it from your MLS and how you're syndicating out and dropping it onto Google from a aggregator, from a third-party connector. And so as we're looking at this information currently, I don't know if there's necessarily anything that Google's going to be looking to do except for this. This could start looking a whole lot like Zillow Premier Agent, to
Yeah.
where you have a zip code that you're purchasing, and then all the leads that are coming through for that zip code, you're getting them. Now Google's just like, that's interesting. We're already the place where they're going to put in the URL. Why don't we get a piece of that pie?
Yeah. Absolutely. So it's not going to cost agents anything for now. It's not going to cost consumers anything for now, but we know that Google's not in the business of not making money.
Yeah, they're not a nonprofit. They're not the March of Dimes. They're absolutely going to come in here and figure out how they can at least make a dollar.
Yeah. All right. So, some news yesterday about the Iran deal being, I don't know what the words are because I watch too many different news sources and everyone calls it something different, but some framework has been established. We think it might get signed on Friday. It's Fed week with a new Fed chair, and what's going to happen to rates?
Yeah, I think this gets very interesting as we're going through, and I think that we all have to keep this in mind. We have a Fed dual mandate where they're trying to keep employment numbers reasonably high, which just means that they're going through and they're saying X amount of Americans cannot have a job, and we're totally comfortable with that number, as well as keeping gas and eggs and groceries and everything else relatively low as far as how much more expensive they get year over year. And what we know is one of the leading drivers to cost is oil prices.
Right.
And so this is huge. Like this Iran deal absolutely needs to happen because firstly, gas prices go down, cost of goods goes down, and then we can actually see the Fed start lowering the cost of money, which helps us as real estate agents because we deal in the highest price point ticketed item that most Americans purchase in their lifetime, and this absolutely affects us.
Exactly. So we're not going to expect anything to happen immediately. The Fed's cautious, especially I think with a new Fed chair. Um, we're probably going to see a little bit of conservative movement or conservative non-movement for just a second, and maybe rates fall a little bit uh, in upcoming months down into the lower sixes.
Which is very interesting, right? Because a handful of years ago, we would have said that rates have to be 3, 4% before there's any movement. And yet, what we're going to notice over these next couple of slides is that this like mid 6% range, Americans are totally comfortable purchasing real estate here. And this is kind of what they expect.
Yep. My daughter just put her first offer in on Saturday and got it accepted. So she's going. US foreclosure filings rise 14% annually in May, led by states in the Southeast. And as we've said before, remember, um, 14%, if there were 100 foreclosures, there weren't, there were more, but if there were 100 foreclosures last year in the US and now there's 114, that doesn't necessarily indicate a crisis. So remember, percentages can fool you, and they're gradually rising up, and they are still well below historic norms, and yet we're starting to see some foreclosure starts because there's financial pressure on lots of households. What's your take here?
Yeah, I think that what's interesting is that we have to keep in mind to what Russ just said was is very important. And
Thank you, Charles.
when we start hearing these percentages of increases, what we need to understand is that numbers lie. And they also tell a story. And so when we're looking at this and we hear that we're up annually 14%, we can automatically go worst case scenario and say, oh no, the sky is falling. And yet, this is the thing. Who needs to go through a foreclosure, right? So this is someone that has probably has maybe lost their job. This is
Mhm.
a negative life event that has something has happened. And yet we understand this is in 2008. The banks do not want to take over homes and get into the real estate business. So they are going to work with most Americans to figure out, what kind of deferment or what kind of other things can we do so that the bank's not having to take over. So this is where it gets interesting. When we're
Yeah.
looking at this, what happens is this: someone loses their job, they get behind on payments, and if they don't have any equity in their home, which we understand that most Americans do, unless you bought over the last handful of years, then yes, you would go into a foreclosure because what happens before this would be a short sale, tons of equity, and guess what? I'm going to move to the Midwest at this point.
Right. Exactly. In Colorado news specifically, Greeley saw a drop in foreclosures, and this just proves the point that um, real estate is all about location, 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 because you can have gradual rising across the country and Greeley being a place that's significantly dropped.
Yeah. When we
So,
start talking about this and we just start thinking about this is a super local business and we're having these conversations, and maybe one of our consumers, buyer, seller, raises their hand and says, listen, like I just read a news story that says that the foreclosure rates are up 14%. And yet we also have this conversation where we say, yeah, and we're also seeing some of the most significant drops in foreclosure rates in Colorado, and Greeley's actually on that list leading the way.
yeah. I think the takeaway for an agent, if I'm listening to this and thinking about it for the first time, is if you weren't an agent during the 2008 era, um, you maybe have never worked a foreclosure. You maybe never have experienced a listing that you took that one day the client called and said, "Hey, the bank just kicked us out. We're done." Um, so this may be a good time to bone up on your knowledge about foreclosure, your knowledge about short sales, understanding what those processes look like. I had a conversation with an agent in my market center recently, and they've got a client who said, "We're just going to let it go." And and I said to that agent, um, well, maybe they need to think about a short sale, like before they just say we're going to abandon the property, and because they have a unique situation. Maybe it's your job to advise them on alternatives to foreclosure, like bank approved short sales.
Yeah, absolutely. Going through, figuring out what that may look like, because they might have just believed that they have ran out of road, and yet they don't
Yeah,
understand all the other different ways that they can protect their investment.
yeah, exactly. All right, so why homeowners aren't moving? So this might be, I don't know if I can, oh, I can zoom this up. Biggest reason US homeowners say they're not moving right now. 57%, massive majority, says my home works. 18% are the other end. They're my home doesn't work, I'm moving. And then you've got a slice, 10% saying my mortgage is too low to give up. And we already kind of alluded to that. These are the twos and the threeers. Home prices are too high. I don't think we're seeing a change there. And rates are too high. So most homeowners, it's key to understand, are pretty happy where they are. Um, their home meets their lifestyle, and they're not having any of the big D's, divorces, diapers, and what are the other D's there? Diamonds,
Yeah,
death.
diamonds.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So things are pretty okay. Affordability remains a challenge. About 20% of people say mortgage rates or home prices are keeping them from moving.
Yeah, and we started seeing this shift, right? When we were looking at this, a handful of years ago, as we were seeing these golden handcuffs, right? The golden handcuff conversation where my interest rate is at 3% and I'm not going to move because I'm going to give up that 3% and be in the 6+ percentage.
Hmm.
And yet, when we're looking at this information, what's important to keep in mind is that, yes, people have gone through and they're saying, does this home check the check boxes that I need for it currently? And we also saw this paradigm shift in our buyers, right? Buyers are now slower to purchase a home because there's so much inventory on the market. Interest rates are higher. And so when they're looking at homes currently, they're asking themselves, can I see myself in this home long term? Right?
Right.
Does it go through? And if I'm planning on having babies, are there extra bedrooms? If I'm going to need to work from home, is there a space for me to do that? What does the yard look like? And so as we're looking at this, this is all this is showing us is firstly that people have made decisions to, does this home meet my lifestyle currently? And then the second graph that we're looking at, it's saying like, well, hey, what's happening with this to where we're saying, what if mortgage rates did fall below 6%? Well, 65% in totality said, well, not much. Like that doesn't do too much for me. But yet, when we look at this other 33% or 20% in this West, or even your 35% in the Midwest, right? We're going through and we're seeing that, Well, maybe money does become the conversation. Like, if rates were to come down, would I go grab another house and maybe potentially rent out my current home that I'm living in? And yet,
Yeah,
to Russ's point, with death, divorce, diapers, diamonds, all these different things, we don't know what life event is going to change someone's perspective. And yet, that's why we need to stay in emotional proximity with them at all times because life happens.
yeah. So it's interesting to see this chart with the different areas of the country um, relative to 6%, which by the way, it's funny because like what's 6%? You know, it's an arbitrary number, which does say to me that pulling out your calculator and showing people the difference between 6-1 and 6-1-2-5 and 6 or 5-8-7-5, like there's not much of a difference there, but whatever.
Yeah.
What do you make of this? What do you make of the Midwest? Uh, if rates fall, I'm somewhat less likely or much less likely to move. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what that looks like unless they remember the pain points that we went through in 2020, 2021, where interest rates were at almost zero to
Ah,
most people. And they were like, I'm not going through that again. Right?
yeah. Okay. So, and of course, I live in the Midwest. So people in the Midwest say, I don't want rates to fall because I don't want to be back in a market where everyone's moving and competing and it's crazy.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I
That's
mean this
funny.
this is where this thing gets interesting as we're going through. It does come down to this, but yet here's the thing. This is what's even more interesting, I think, is that if this is true, and let's just pretend that it is, let's just take this as gospel that they went through and every American feels this way, and this is a great data point. Well, what does it look like for me to get into a relationship with home builders that are offering incentives for less than 6%?
Yeah.
Right, and start advertising that. So if I'm going through and I'm thinking, okay, well, every American says that 6% is nutty to them and they need to get below that. Well, what if I were to go find some builders that have some incentives that put them at five something and be able to advertise that to my databases, thinking that this is the norm?
Yeah. That's an interesting point. What does it look like to buy yourself into at that rate on a resale?
And do our people know? Like, are we educating enough people that are in our bubbles to where they understand that this is a possibility and I am the gatekeeper for that? So that emotional proximity again to where we're putting it out on social media. We have our newsletters. We're at the barbecue and talking about real estate and making sure that we're like, well, actually, I just saw this article that read, most homeowners would purchase a home if it dropped below 6%. And yet I have this relationship with this builder that's offering a 5.5 for a brand new home.
Yeah.
What do we think happens there?
You know, I told you I helped my daughter buy a house this weekend, and
Yeah.
that's true. Um, and it's interesting. We had a good lender. In fact, he's his name's Chance. He's our top flight home loans guy in Colorado. And as we're talking about this, it's making me realize like I had Chance run a bunch of different scenarios. Like what if we, because my daughter's, a teacher and she doesn't have oodles of cash. She's got a nice down payment, but um, what happens if we buy a home for 10,000 less? What happens if we drop the rate by an eighth? What happens if we find a development with an HOA that's X dollars cheaper? And it's really interesting when you start working through the what ifs, all the different iterations of what makes something work versus not work. And, working with Chance on this, and he did a bunch of homework to help me. Like, we figured out what was the like optimal matrix of like stretch the price but do it in an
Yeah.
area that's got a lower HOA and do it with some points paid by the seller and I'm used to in my area multiple offers on everything still, and we put in the perfect offer and got it accepted right away. But but it was a very custom tailored to her spending to get her just exactly what she needed on a debt to income ratio. And the lender helped a ton with that homework.
Yeah, I just picture like walking down a hallway and like chance is opening a door and there's just this wall of what ifs and just like that twine
Yeah,
going to different places with like circles, like best scenario.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So use your lender. All right, mortgage purchase applications index. A buyer demand surprise to the upside. Purchase applications have jumped 7% week over week, 17% year over year. And that typically means we're going to see some homes going under contract.
Yeah, guys,
Charles?
we know this is a 90-day business, right? Like you got into real estate if that was, last week or last decade or longer. We understand that real estate is 90 days out. And so we look at this information and we see, cool, we're up 17% more people have raised their hand, said, I'm interested in figuring out what I qualify for today over last year. And yet, what we do understand is this, that they're at least 90 days away from making a decision. So we go back, death, divorce, diamonds, diapers, and this is about being emotional proximity to people. So, guys, this should be one of the most exciting graphs that we see
Yeah,
here is that people are curious on what they qualify for. Interest rates are not at an all-time low. We understand that this 6.5% is what makes people feel a little bit better about purchasing a house, and yet we know that life events happen. So
yeah,
my question to everyone on this call would be this: are we in relationship with enough people for this to matter? Or is this something that we're looking at? We're like, oh goodness, like I'm not talking to my people. Like this doesn't matter to me. Hopefully I trip over a deal tomorrow.
yep, absolutely. Um, with the war ending, with the Fed acting potentially or not acting this week, what do you think is going to happen next week on this?
Yeah,
Up,
I mean,
up or flat or down?
yeah, I mean, I would like to land on just flat because
Me too.
yeah, like that just feels like the safe choice. And again, like when I look at the Fed, while I understand that the Fed president who was recently tapped on the shoulder and installed is pro let's lower rates, there's still a lot of people around them they're going to have a big decision around what's happening. And I think that as we're getting out of this war, this conflict, which I do hope does come to an end
Yeah,
sooner rather than later. These things take time. I mean, this is a massive, massive ship that they're having to correct,
yeah,
and it's just not a flip of a switch. And even if it was, let's just pretend it was, Russ. Like, let's just make sure that we're educating everyone on this call. Is that let's just pretend that the Fed goes through and lowers rates. Well, that doesn't necessarily mean that the bank's going to lower rates with them. So please don't be that
right,
agent,
right.
right? What this is what happens is they start lowering rates to the bank, and the bank don't want a cascade of refis happening. So
Right.
they start pushing this out very, very slowly because the bank would lose money. So even if this thing did happen by Friday, we're going to have a waiting period.
Yeah, for sure. All right. I think this is our last one. New listings.
Yeah.
What's going
Also,
on here?
guys, this is exciting news, right? Like as we're looking at this, again, these are people that are raising their hand that said, like, I have to sell my house. Because just keep in mind, like, who's buying, who's selling in this arena right now that we're in, and it's the motivated. It's the motivated buyer, it's the motivated seller. And they're putting their homes on the market because something is happening in their life. And so we have more listings coming in. We also are seeing more purchase mortgage application data going up. What this is saying is, listen, guys, the American dream is not dead. Buyers still want to buy, sellers still want to sell. And when we go through and we look at this, it's very, very important to keep in mind it's not 2008. And so, Russ, like as we're going through and we're just looking at all this data, we're talking about the Fed, we're talking about purchase mortgage application data, we are talking about foreclosures. We have all this information. What is one or two things that our agents should be looking at today? So whether it's taking mind share for market share later, or what's our big tip for these guys to go home with?
I think the big tip to go home with is this. Like we're in an industry where we know a lot more than our clients do. And we have to be educating them. I mean, we just had Day on the regional rally, and he is pumping out information. He's doing walk and talks about rates. He is giving updates. He's doing talking head videos like Charles has talked about on recent trainings. I think it's really important that we use what's going on to spend more time with our clients and get really um, into like education mode and let them know that there's more houses out there. People are making purchases. It is not time to wait. It's time to take action.
Yeah. So looks like we got to take massive, massive mind share. The market share follows. There's not enough inventory for us to see a housing crash or an Airbnb bust or the silver tsunami or anything else to impact anything. So our only job is to create more relationships, stay in touch with our people in a systematic and strategic way. And we know that the market share will follow. I like it, Russ.
All right, Charles, take care. Everybody, take care. See you next Monday.
Bye all.